The shot rang out at exactly noon, echoing through the dusty streets of Silver Creek like a challenge to the heavens themselves. Victoria Granger stood unflinching on the weathered porch of Pearson's General Store, her gaze fixed on the man who'd just fired his pistol into the air, the very man who was supposed to marry her yesterday but had returned her to her father's doorstep instead. "Thomas O'Malley," she called out, her voice carrying across the street with a strength that made several onlookers turn and stare. "If you've come to make more of a spectacle of yourself, you're doing an admirable job." The tall cowboy holstered his pistol with practiced ease, his movements fluid as he crossed the street. Dust kicked up beneath his worn boots, the spurs jingling with each determined step. His face, tanned from years under the unforgiving western sun, broke into a slow smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Miss Granger," he said, removing his hat in a gesture that might have seemed polite if not for the tension crackling between them. "I believe we have unfinished business." It was 1878, and Silver Creek, Colorado was still very much a frontier town, rough around the edges, but growing with the promise of silver in the nearby mountains and the railroad that would soon connect it to Denver. Victoria had come west with her father 3 years ago after her mother's passing, trading Boston's refinement for the raw beauty and harsh reality of the West. "The only unfinished business we have," Victoria replied, straightening her back, "is you explaining to the entire town why you returned me to my father like damaged goods after our wedding rehearsal." A crowd was gathering now, the citizens of Silver Creek unable to resist the drama unfolding before them. Victoria could see Mrs. Hemingway whispering behind her hand to the blacksmith's wife, while Sheriff Donovan leaned against the post office building, watching with cautious interest. Thomas stepped closer, lowering his voice, though not enough to prevent the nearest bystanders from hearing. "I think you know exactly why, Victoria. No man wants a wife who'll challenge his every word, who speaks her mind regardless of company or circumstance." Victoria felt her cheeks flush with anger and humiliation. "Then why are you here now? To shame me further?" Thomas's expression shifted, something unreadable flickering across his features. "No," he said, surprising her. "I'm here because I made a mistake." The murmurs of the crowd grew louder. Victoria's father, George Granger, emerged from his apothecary shop down the street, his pace quickening when he spotted the confrontation. "Victoria," her father called out in warning. But Victoria stood her ground, her green eyes narrowed at the cowboy before her. "A mistake? You publicly humiliated me, Thomas. You told my father I had a tongue too sharp for any decent man to bear." Thomas took another step closer, close enough now that Victoria could smell the leather of his vest and the faint scent of horse and prairie that always seemed to cling to him. "I was wrong," he said, his voice low and intense. "That sharp tongue of yours, that fierce spirit, that's the reason I want you, Victoria. Not despite it." The crowd fell silent, hanging on every word. Victoria's breath caught in her throat. "You expect me to believe that? After what you did?" "No," Thomas replied honestly. "I expect you to make me earn back every bit of trust one destroyed. But I'm willing to try if you are." Victoria's father reached them then, his expression thunderous. "O'Malley, you have some nerve showing your face here after what you did to my daughter." Thomas nodded respectfully to the older man but kept his eyes on Victoria. "Mr. Granger, I've come to make things right." "There's nothing right to be made," George Granger snapped. "You've said your piece. Now leave." Victoria found her voice again, though it wavered slightly. "I can speak for myself, Father." She turned her attention back to Thomas. "You returned me because I dared to disagree with you about the ranch management, because I suggested that your plans for expansion might be premature." "I returned you because I was a fool," Thomas responded, the admission clearly difficult for him. "Because I was raised to believe a wife should be demure and agreeable. But out here," he gestured to the vast landscape beyond the town, Those qualities don't keep you alive. Your strength, your intelligence, your willingness to speak your mind, those are the qualities a man needs in a partner in this wilderness. Victoria's heart raced, but she kept her expression neutral. 3 years in the West had taught her caution, especially with men who spoke pretty words. Words come easy, Thomas. Actions speak louder. Thomas nodded slowly. That's fair. Give me the chance to show you. Work with me on the ranch for 1 month. See for yourself if I mean what I say. If I don't, you can walk away, and I'll never bother you again. The proposition hung in the air between them. Victoria was acutely aware of the townspeople watching, of her father's disapproving frown, of her own wounded pride still smarting from the rejection. "And why should I give you that chance?" she asked, her voice steadier now. Thomas's eyes never left hers. "Because despite everything, there's something between us worth fighting for. You feel it too, or you wouldn't be so angry." The truth of his words stung. Victoria did feel it, had felt it since the day Thomas O'Malley rode into Silver Creek last year, buying the old Peterson Ranch and transforming it into one of the most promising cattle operations in the territory. Their courtship had been whirlwind and passionate, right up until the moment he'd decided her opinions were too much to bear. 1 month, Victoria finally said, ignoring her father's protest. "But I'll be staying in town with my father, and I'll be coming as your business partner, not as your bride." Thomas replaced his hat, a smile breaking across his face. "I'll take what I can get, Miss Granger. I'll expect you at the ranch tomorrow at dawn." He tipped his hat to her, then to her father, before turning and walking back toward his horse tethered outside the saloon. The crowd began to disperse, their appetite for drama temporarily satisfied. Victoria's father took her arm, his grip tight. "Victoria, have you lost your mind? That man humiliated you in front of the entire town. And now you're going to work for him." Victoria watched Thomas mount his horse with the easy grace that had first caught her attention. "No, father. I'm going to work with him. There's a difference. And if he's truly changed, I need to know. And if he hasn't," her father challenged. Victoria turned to him, a determined gleam in her eye. "Then I'll make him regret ever coming back for me." As the sun rose the next morning, Victoria mounted her Palomino mare, Penny, and set off for the O'Malley Ranch. She dressed practically in a split riding skirt and sturdy blouse, her honey blonde hair braided and tucked beneath a wide-brimmed hat. The morning air was crisp with the promise of a hot day ahead, the landscape bathed in golden light that made the distant mountains look painted against the sky. The ride took nearly an hour, giving Victoria plenty of time to second-guess her decision. Pride had always been her weakness, her father often said. Perhaps agreeing to Thomas's proposition was merely her pride refusing to let him have the last word. Or perhaps, a small voice whispered, she truly did want to believe he had changed. The O'Malley Ranch came into view as she crested a gentle hill, a sprawling property with a main house built of sturdy logs, a large barn, and several outbuildings. A corral held horses being broken for work, and in the distance, Victoria could make out the grazing cattle that were the ranch's primary business. Thomas was waiting for her by the main gate, as if he'd been watching for her approach. He wore no jacket today, just a simple shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms corded with muscle from years of ranch work. He tipped his hat as she approached. "Right on time," he said appreciatively. Victoria dismounted without assistance. "I said I would be." Thomas nodded, leading her toward the main house. "I thought we'd start with breakfast, then I can show you the books. I remember you have a good head for numbers." "Better than yours," she replied before she could stop herself. To her surprise, Thomas laughed. "That's not saying much. I can barely keep the ledger straight most days." Inside the house, the main room was simply furnished but clean, with a large table dominating the space. The kitchen area held a wood-burning stove where a pot of coffee simmered. Two ranch hands were finishing their breakfast at the table. They stood awkwardly when Victoria entered. "Boys, you remember Miss Granger," Thomas said by way of introduction. "She'll be helping with the ranch management for a while." The men, one older with a weathered face and the other barely out of his teens, nodded respectfully. "Miss Granger," the older one said. "Jim Cook. We met at the—" He cut himself off, clearly realizing he was about to mention the wedding rehearsal. "The town dance last spring," Victoria supplied smoothly. "I remember, Mr. Cook." The younger man introduced himself as Ethan Walsh, newly arrived from Kansas. Both men quickly finished their meals and excused themselves to their duties, leaving Thomas and Victoria alone. Thomas gestured for her to sit while he served up plates of eggs and bacon. "I'm not much of a cook," he warned, "but it's edible." Victoria removed her hat, setting it on an empty chair. "I didn't come here for your cooking skills." "No," Thomas agreed, sitting across from her. "You came to see if I meant what I said yesterday." They ate in silence for a few minutes, the awkwardness between them palpable. Victoria found herself studying Thomas when he wasn't looking, the way his hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck, the tiny scar above his right eyebrow from a fall during a cattle drive he'd told her about during their courtship. Familiar details that now seemed to belong to a stranger. "Why did you really come back?" Victoria asked suddenly, setting down her fork. Thomas met her gaze steadily. "I told you the truth yesterday. I made a mistake. A big one. Men with pride like yours don't usually admit to mistakes," she observed. "Men with pride like mine don't usually meet women like you," he countered. "You scared me, Victoria." The admission surprised her. "I scared you? How?" Thomas leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "All my life, I've been the one in charge of myself, of my work, of my future. Then you came along, just as strong-willed, just as determined as me. When you started questioning my plans for the ranch expansion, pointing out flaws in my thinking I hadn't considered. You felt threatened," Victoria finished for him. "I felt like I was losing control," he corrected. "It was easier to walk away than to admit you might be right. That maybe I needed someone who would challenge me." Victoria studied him, trying to gauge his sincerity. "And what changed your mind?" "I tried to implement those expansion plans anyway," Thomas said with a rueful smile. "Lost nearly a quarter of my savings before I realized the timing was all wrong, exactly as you'd said it would be." Despite herself, Victoria felt a flicker of satisfaction. "So you came back because you need my business acumen." "I came back because I need you," Thomas said simply. "Your mind, your spirit, all of it. But I understand why you don't believe me yet." The directness of his gaze made Victoria look away first. "Show me these books you're having trouble with," she said, changing the subject. "If I'm to be your business partner for the month, I should know what I'm working with." Thomas nodded, clearing their plates before retrieving a leather-bound ledger from a shelf. He set it before her, opening to the most recent entries. Victoria leaned forward, focusing on the columns of numbers rather than the man sitting beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "Your cattle count doesn't match your sales records," she noted after a few minutes of study. Thomas frowned. "What do you mean?" Victoria pointed to the entries. "According to this, you sold 35 head last month to the Army contract, but your herd count only decreased by 28. Either your count is off or someone's rustling my cattle," Thomas finished, his expression darkening. "I've suspected as much, but I couldn't make sense of the numbers to prove it." Victoria flipped through more pages. "It's been happening for at least 3 months. Small enough numbers each time to go unnoticed unless you're keeping careful track." Thomas stood abruptly, pacing the room. "Damnation. I knew something wasn't right." The south pasture fence has been tampered with twice now. You need to bring this to Sheriff Donovan, Victoria suggested. Thomas shook his head. Not yet. If word gets out that I'm losing cattle, it could affect the army contract. I need to catch whoever's doing this first. How do you propose to do that? Victoria asked. Thomas turned to her, determination etched on his features. We set a trap, but I'll need your help. Victoria felt a surge of excitement despite herself. This was precisely the kind of partnership she had envisioned when she'd agreed to marry Thomas, working together as equals, combining their strengths to overcome challenges. Tell me what you have in mind, she said. Thomas smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes and reminded Victoria why she'd fallen for him in the first place. First, we need to figure out which of my hands might be involved. No stranger could know the ranch routine well enough to take cattle repeatedly without being noticed. Victoria nodded, her mind already working through the problem. You need to feed them false information, different information to different people, and see which leads to action. Exactly what I was thinking, Thomas said, looking at her with newfound respect. I knew that sharp mind of yours would be valuable. Victoria ignored the compliment, though it warmed her more than she cared to admit. How many hands work for you now? 7 full-time, plus 3 seasonal workers who started last month for the summer roundup. The rustling started 3 months ago, you said? So it's likely one of your regulars. Thomas nodded grimly. Men I've trusted with my livelihood. Victoria closed the ledger. Well, Mr. O'Malley, it seems we have our work cut out for us. What do you want me to tell people in town about why I'm suddenly working with you? The truth, Thomas replied, that I asked for your help with the books and the ranch management for a month. It's no secret I'm better with cattle than columns of numbers. Victoria stood, straightening her skirt. Very well. I should get a better look at the operation if I'm to be useful. Would you show me around? Thomas led her outside into the brightening day. The tour took over 2 hours, during which Victoria met the rest of the ranch hands and saw the extent of Thomas's operation. It was impressive, nearly 1,500 acres with 300 head of cattle, a small but growing horse breeding program, and enough grazing land to expand considerably if managed correctly. As they rode along the southern boundary of the property, Victoria noticed the fence Thomas had mentioned. Sure enough, there were signs of recent repair. When was the last time you found this damaged? She asked, dismounting to examine the posts. 2 weeks ago, Thomas replied, joining her on the ground. Jim found it during his morning rounds. We lost at least 10 head that night. Victoria studied the surrounding area. There's a stream just beyond those trees, isn't there? I remember you mentioning it when you first bought the property. Thomas nodded. Good water year-round. That's why this pasture is valuable, especially in the dry months. And it provides cover for anyone driving cattle off your land, Victoria added. They could follow the stream for miles without being seen from the ranch. Thomas watched her with a thoughtful expression. You know, when I was courting you, I never realized just how useful your mind would be to running this place. Victoria straightened, giving him a cool look. Perhaps if you'd spent more time listening to me and less time expecting me to agree with everything you said, you would have. Instead of bristling at her sharp tone, Thomas nodded. You're right. I deserved that. His easy admission caught Victoria off guard. The Thomas she remembered would have argued, would have defended his position rather than conceding hers. She wasn't sure what to make of this changed man. We should head back, she said finally. I need to return to town before dark, and we still need to devise our plan for catching the rustlers. As they rode back toward the main house, side by side across the sun-drenched grassland, Victoria found herself stealing glances at Thomas. He sat tall in the saddle, at home on horseback in a way that spoke of years spent in the wilderness. He'd come west as a young man, He told her during their courtship, working cattle drives up from Texas before saving enough to buy his own spread. What made you choose ranching? She asked suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence that had fallen between them. Thomas looked surprised by the question. I grew up in Chicago, son of a butcher, spent my childhood surrounded by meat but never saw where it came from. When I was 16, I took a job with a cattle broker, traveled to Texas to inspect a herd. The first time I saw cowboys working cattle across the open range. He shook his head, a smile playing at his lips. I knew I'd found my place in the world. You never told me that before, Victoria said. You never asked, Thomas replied simply. There's a lot we never got around to talking about, isn't there? Victoria couldn't deny it. Their courtship had been quick, barely 4 months from their first meeting to the wedding rehearsal disaster. In that time, they'd been so caught up in the passion between them that many deeper conversations had been neglected. Perhaps that was part of the problem, she admitted. They reached the main house, where Victoria's mare was tethered. Thomas helped her gather her things and walked her to her horse, maintaining a respectful distance that somehow disappointed her. Tomorrow, he said as she mounted, I'll start spreading different stories to the hands. Can you come back the day after? By then, we might have something to go on. Victoria nodded. I'll be here at the same time. She paused, then added, Thank you for today, Thomas. It was instructive. Thank you for giving me this chance, he replied, his expression serious. I won't waste it. As Victoria rode away, she couldn't help glancing back once to see Thomas still standing where she'd left him, watching her departure. Something had shifted between them today, a tentative bridge beginning to form over the chasm of hurt and misunderstanding that had separated them. Whether it would be strong enough to cross remained to be seen. When Victoria arrived at the ranch 2 days later, she found Thomas waiting for her with barely contained excitement. He led her quickly to the barn, away from the ears of the ranch hands going about their morning chores. I think I know who's involved, he said in a low voice once they were alone among the horses. Yesterday morning, I told Jim Cook that I'd be moving the best breeding stock to the north pasture for extra protection. Told Ethan Walsh I was concerned about the east fence line. Gave different stories to each hand. And, Victoria prompted, feeling a tingle of anticipation. Last night, I camped out near the south pasture, hidden in the trees by the stream. Just after midnight, I saw lanterns moving near the fence line. 2 men were cutting the wire. I couldn't get close enough to identify them without giving myself away. But this morning, Walsh asked if I'd checked the south pasture yet. Said he thought he heard something in the night. Victoria frowned. That's hardly proof. He might genuinely have heard something. True, Thomas acknowledged. But then I noticed his boots, mud on them with bits of creek moss, the same kind that grows along that stream. None of his morning duties would have taken him there. Still circumstantial, Victoria cautioned. And you said there were 2 men. Who's the other? Thomas ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in the gesture. That's where I'm stuck. I don't think it's Jim. He's been with me since I bought the place. Loyal to a fault. The others all have solid alibis for last night. They were playing cards in the bunkhouse until well past midnight, according to the cook. Victoria considered the problem. Ethan must have a partner from outside the ranch. Someone local who knows the area well enough to move cattle without being spotted. That narrows it down to half the county, Thomas said dryly. Not necessarily, Victoria replied, an idea forming. The cattle have to be sold somewhere, and not many buyers would take cattle without proper branding papers. Unless they're rebranding them, Thomas finished her thought. But that would take time and a proper setup. Victoria nodded. We need to follow Ethan the next time he leaves the ranch on his day off. When is that? Sunday, Thomas said. Day after tomorrow. Perfect, Victoria said. I'll tell my father I'm staying at the Miller farm overnight. Mrs. Miller will cover for me. She's been trying to match me with eligible bachelors since we arrived in Silver Creek. Thomas raised an eyebrow. And where will you actually be? With you, Victoria said matter-of-factly, ignoring the way his eyes widened. Following Ethan Walsh to catch a cattle thief. Thomas studied her for a long moment. This could be dangerous, Victoria. These men won't take kindly to being caught. I'm well aware of the dangers, she replied, lifting her skirt just enough to reveal a small pistol in an ankle holster. Father insisted I learn to protect myself after Mother died. I'm quite a good shot. A slow smile spread across Thomas's face. You continue to surprise me, Miss Granger. Good, Victoria said firmly. That means you're finally paying attention. The next 2 days passed in a flurry of preparation. Victoria divided her time between her father's shop in town and the ranch, where she continued to help Thomas with the accounts while they refined their plan. To maintain appearances, she made sure to be seen arguing with Thomas at least once in the presence of the ranch hands, storming out of the house with ledgers clutched to her chest. You're quite the actress, Thomas murmured when she returned through the back door minutes later. It wasn't entirely an act, Victoria replied with a small smile. You do still have infuriating habits, Mr. O'Malley. By Sunday morning, everything was in place. Victoria had arrived before dawn, dressed in men's trousers and a loose shirt borrowed from Mrs. Miller's son who was away at school in Denver. Her hair was tucked beneath a hat, and from a distance, she could pass for a slender young man. Thomas had saddled 2 of his quietest horses, and they waited in the small copse of trees behind the bunkhouse. Just after 9, Ethan Walsh emerged, saddled his horse and rode out toward town. Once he had a good head start, Thomas and Victoria followed, keeping to the cover of the rolling hills whenever possible. Walsh rode past Silver Creek, continuing south for another hour until he reached a small, isolated cabin set back against a rocky hillside. Smoke rose from the chimney, suggesting someone was home. Thomas and Victoria dismounted a safe distance away, tethering their horses out of sight before continuing on foot. They approached cautiously, using the natural cover of boulders and scrub brush. I know that place, Thomas whispered as they crouched behind a large rock. It belonged to Old Man Harker, but he died last winter. I didn't know anyone had moved in. They watched as Walsh dismounted and entered the cabin without knocking. Minutes later, he emerged with another man tall and lean with a shock of red hair visible beneath his hat. Vernon Dawson, Thomas breathed, recognition and anger mingling in his voice. The livestock broker from Sterling. He handles most of the cattle sales in the county. The perfect accomplice, Victoria realized. He would know which ranchers are buying, which brands would raise questions. He could easily forge paperwork or claim the cattle came from struggling ranches selling off their stock. They watched as Walsh and Dawson headed toward a small corral behind the cabin. Inside were at least a dozen cattle, Thomas's cattle, based on his sharp intake of breath. That's my brand, he growled, pointing to a marking visible on one of the animals. They've started to alter it, but you can still see the original. Victoria placed a restraining hand on his arm. We need more proof before we confront them. Let's get closer. See if we can hear what they're saying. They crept forward, using a dried-up creek bed for cover until they were within earshot of the 2 men. Another 20 head next week, Walsh was saying. O'Malley's distracted with that Granger woman back at the ranch. He's barely paying attention to the herd counts. Dawson chuckled. Never thought she'd go back to him after what he did. Must be desperate. Victoria felt Thomas tense beside her, his jaw clenching. She tightened her grip on his arm. Doesn't matter, Walsh continued. Makes our job easier. The army contract pays top dollar, and they don't look too closely at the paperwork as long as the cattle are healthy. You're selling my cattle to my own buyers, Thomas muttered under his breath. Clever bastards. They'd heard enough. Thomas motioned for Victoria to follow him back to their horses. Once they were safely out of earshot, he turned to her, his expression grim. We need to alert the sheriff, Victoria said. We have names, evidence, even confession. Thomas nodded. I'll ride to town immediately. You should stay here. Keep an eye on them in case they move the cattle. Victoria opened her mouth to argue but realized he was right. Someone needed to ensure the evidence didn't disappear. Be careful, she said instead. And hurry back. Thomas mounted his horse, then hesitated. Victoria, about what Walsh said. This isn't the time. She cut him off. We'll discuss that later. With a nod, Thomas rode off towards Silver Creek, pushing his horse to a gallop once he was safely distant from the cabin. Victoria settled into a hidden position where she could observe without being seen, the small pistol now in her hand rather than her ankle holster. An hour passed slowly, the sun climbing higher in the sky. Victoria watched as Walsh and Dawson worked on the cattle, altering brands with hot irons that made her wince at the animals' distress. They were methodical and practiced, suggesting they'd been at this scheme for some time. Another hour crept by, and Victoria began to worry. Thomas should have reached town by now, and the return journey with the sheriff shouldn't take this long. Had something happened? She was considering her options when a movement near the cabin caught her attention. A third man had arrived, riding hard from the direction of Silver Creek. He dismounted quickly, calling out to Walsh and Dawson with obvious urgency. Though too distant to hear the words, Victoria could read the panic in their body language. The new arrival gestured wildly toward town, and within minutes, all three men were gathering supplies and mounting their horses. They were running. Victoria realized Thomas and the sheriff must be on their way, and somehow the thieves had been warned. If they escaped now with the altered cattle, a crucial piece of evidence would be lost. She had to stall them. Making a split-second decision, Victoria aimed her pistol at the sky and fired twice. The shots echoed across the landscape, temporarily freezing the men in surprise. Then she fired again, this time toward the corral gate but deliberately missing. The cattle, already unsettled by the gunfire, began to panic as the bullet splintered would near them. The effect was immediate. The corral gate burst open as the frightened animals charged through, scattering in all directions. Walsh and Dawson abandoned their packing to chase after the valuable livestock, while the third man drew his gun, scanning the surroundings for the shooter. Victoria ducked lower behind her rocky cover, heart pounding. She'd bought some time, but now at least one armed man was looking for her. She needed to move. Keeping low, she began to circle around, intending to reach her horse and ride for help. She'd covered perhaps 50 yards when a voice stopped her cold. That's far enough, boy. She turned slowly to find the third man, a weathered cowhand she didn't recognize, pointing a revolver at her chest. Her own pistol was still in her hand, but she knew she couldn't raise it before he fired. Drop the gun, he ordered. Victoria complied, letting the pistol fall to the ground. The man stepped closer, his eyes narrowing as he got a better look at her face beneath the hat. Well, well, he said, a slow, unpleasant smile spreading across his face. You're no boy. You're O'Malley's woman, aren't you? The one with the sharp tongue. Victoria straightened, refusing to show fear. And you're a cattle thief about to face justice. Sheriff Donovan is on his way here now. The man's smile didn't falter. Then I reckon we best be gone before he arrives. And you're coming with us, Miss Granger. Insurance, like. Before Victoria could respond, hoofbeats sounded from the direction of the cabin. Walsh and Dawson had returned, having rounded up some of the scattered cattle. "Who've you got there, Pete?" Dawson called out, then gave a low whistle as he recognized Victoria. "Well, this complicates things. She's our ticket out," the man called Pete replied. "O'Malley won't risk his woman getting hurt." Walsh dismounted, approaching Victoria with a scowl. "You should have minded your own business, Miss Granger." "Stealing is my business when it affects my partner," Victoria replied coolly, her mind racing for a way out of this situation. Dawson laughed. "Partner? Is that what you're calling it now? Last I heard, he returned you to your daddy because you talked too much." Victoria bit back a retort, recognizing that antagonizing them would only make her situation worse. "What do you intend to do now?" "We're leaving," Dawson said firmly, "and you're coming along until we're well clear. Then we'll let you go, provided O'Malley doesn't give us trouble." Victoria doubted very much they intended to let her go at all, but she nodded as if accepting their terms. "My horse is hidden in the trees over there," she said, pointing in the opposite direction of where her mount was actually tethered. Pete grabbed her arm roughly. "Nice try. You'll ride with me." They led her back to the cabin, where they hastily finished packing supplies. Victoria was kept under guard, Pete's gun never far from her side. She watched for any opportunity to escape, but the men were careful, clearly experienced in watching prisoners. Just as they were preparing to leave, Victoria heard what she'd been praying for: the distant sound of approaching riders, multiple horses moving at speed. "That'll be the sheriff," she said, unable to keep the relief from her voice. Dawson cursed, shoving the last of his supplies into a saddlebag. "Pete, bring her. Walsh, get those cattle moving southeast. We'll meet at the old mining camp as planned." Pete grabbed Victoria, dragging her toward his horse. She struggled, knowing that once they separated her from the stolen cattle, her value as a hostage would be her only protection. "Let me go," she shouted, hoping her voice would carry to the approaching riders. Pete clamped a hand over her mouth, lifting her bodily toward his saddle. Victoria bit down hard on his palm, earning a howl of pain and a momentary loosening of his grip. She twisted free, stumbling away only to be caught by Dawson. "Enough!" he snarled, pulling a knife from his belt and holding it to her throat. One more sound and the crack of a rifle shot cut him off. The bullet kicked up dirt just inches from Dawson's feet, causing him to jerk back, dragging Victoria with him. "Let her go, Dawson." Thomas's voice rang out from the ridge above the cabin. "Next one won't miss." Victoria could see him now, rifle aimed steady, Sheriff Donovan and 2 deputies spread out beside him. Relief flooded through her, but Dawson's knife remained at her throat. "Back off, O'Malley," Dawson shouted, "or your woman gets it." Thomas's voice was eerily calm when he replied, "You've got one chance to let her go. One. And then what?" Dawson sneered. "You'll shoot me while I'm holding her?" "I don't think so." Victoria met Thomas's eyes across the distance. In that moment, something passed between them, a silent communication, a trust that had been missing before. She gave the slightest nod. "You're right," Thomas called back. "I won't shoot you while you're holding her." The tension in Dawson's body eased slightly, believing he had the upper hand. It was the opening Victoria needed. In one swift movement, she drove her elbow hard into Dawson's stomach, simultaneously dropping her weight to slip beneath the knife. As she fell to the ground, Thomas fired. The bullet caught Dawson in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending the knife flying from his grasp. Pete raised his gun, but a shot from one of the deputies disarmed him before he could fire. Walsh, seeing the situation deteriorating, made a break for his horse but was cut off by Sheriff Donovan riding down from the ridge. Within moments, it was over. The 3 rustlers were disarmed and under arrest, the stolen cattle rounded up as evidence. Victoria found herself trembling as the danger passed, the reality of how close she'd come to serious harm sinking in. Thomas was beside her in an instant, dismounting before his horse had fully stopped and gathering her into his arms. "Are you hurt? Did they harm you?" Victoria shook her head against his chest. "No, I'm fine. Just shaken." Thomas held her tighter, his heart pounding against her ear. "When I saw him with that knife at your throat, I nearly lost my mind." "But you didn't," Victoria said, pulling back to look up at him. "You stayed calm, trusted me to do my part." "I knew you could handle yourself," Thomas replied, a hint of pride in his voice. "That fierce spirit of yours isn't just for arguing with me, it seems." Despite everything, Victoria found herself smiling. "Speaking of arguing, we still have plenty to discuss, Mr. O'Malley." Thomas laughed, the sound rich with relief. "I look forward to it, Miss Granger. Every word." Sheriff Donovan approached them, his expression a mixture of exasperation and respect. "Miss Granger, I ought to lock you up alongside these rustlers for pulling such a dangerous stunt. But I have to admit, you've got more courage than most men I know." "Thank you, Sheriff," Victoria replied. "Though I hope this will be my last adventure in law enforcement." "Amen to that," Thomas muttered. The journey back to Silver Creek was triumphant, with the sheriff and deputies escorting the captured rustlers while Thomas and Victoria followed with the recovered cattle. Word of their adventure spread quickly through the small town, and by evening, Victoria found herself the center of attention at her father's dinner table as she recounted the day's events. "I still can't believe you put yourself in such danger," George Granger said for the third time, his face pale beneath his beard. "You could have been killed." "But I wasn't, Father," Victoria replied gently. "And we caught the thieves who have been plaguing ranchers throughout the county." Sheriff Donovan said they've confessed to stealing from at least 4 other spreads besides Thomas's. Her father harumphed, clearly not mollified. "And what of O'Malley? Is this partnership of yours to continue now that the thieves are caught?" Victoria hesitated. In the excitement of the day, she and Thomas hadn't discussed what came next. She still had 3 weeks left of her promised month at the ranch, but the immediate reason for her presence catching the rustlers had been resolved. "I believe that's for Victoria to decide," Thomas said from the doorway, having arrived to check on her as promised. George Granger frowned at the intrusion but gestured for Thomas to enter. "Come in, O'Malley. We were just discussing your arrangement with my daughter." Thomas removed his hat as he stepped inside, nodding respectfully to Victoria's father. "Mr. Granger, I came to thank Victoria again for her help today and to make sure she was recovering from the ordeal." "I'm perfectly fine," Victoria assured him, though in truth her nerves were still raw from the danger she'd faced. "Please sit. Have you eaten?" Thomas accepted the seat she offered but declined food. "I can't stay long. The ranch needs attention after all the excitement." An awkward silence fell over the table. George Granger cleared his throat and excused himself, muttering about inventory that needed checking, leaving Thomas and Victoria alone in the small dining room. "Your father still doesn't approve of me," Thomas observed once George was out of earshot. "Can't say I blame him," Victoria sighed. "He's protective. And you did hurt me rather publicly." "A mistake I'll regret until my dying day," Thomas said quietly. "But one I'm hoping to spend a very long time making up for, if you'll let me." Victoria's heart quickened at his words, but caution held her back. "Thomas, what happened today was extraordinary. We worked well together, trusted each other when it mattered most. But that doesn't erase what came before." Thomas leaned forward, his eyes intent on hers. "I know that. I'm not asking for forgiveness I haven't earned yet. I'm asking for the chance to earn it, day by day." "And how would you do that?" Victoria asked, genuinely curious. "By listening more than I speak," Thomas replied without hesitation. By valuing your mind as much as your beauty. By being a partner to you in all things, not just when danger forces my hand. His words stirred something in Victoria, hope, perhaps, or the rekindling of feelings she tried to bury after his rejection. But experience had taught her to be wary of pretty promises. Those are fine words, she said carefully, but I need to see them in action, consistently, before I can trust them. Thomas nodded, accepting her caution. That's fair. Will you still come to the ranch tomorrow? We have 3 weeks left of our agreement, and I meant what I said about wanting your help with the management. Victoria considered his request. After today's events, returning to normal ranch work seemed almost anticlimactic. Yet she couldn't deny that part of her wanted to see if what had passed between them during the danger could translate to everyday life. I'll come, she decided, but on one condition. Name it, Thomas said immediately. I want a real role in the ranch operations, not just helping with the books. If we're to be partners, even temporarily, I want to learn everything: the cattle, the land management, the business negotiations. Thomas smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. I wouldn't have it any other way. In fact, I was hoping you'd help me revise those expansion plans you criticized before. You were right about the timing being wrong, but the idea itself has merit. Victoria found herself returning his smile. I'd like that. Thomas stood, replacing his hat. Until tomorrow then, Miss Granger. As he turned to leave, Victoria called after him. Thomas. He paused at the doorway, looking back. Thank you for coming for me today, she said softly. His expression softened. Always, Victoria. That's one promise I can make with absolute certainty. After he'd gone, Victoria sat for a long time at the table, her thoughts swirling. The events of the day had shown her a different side of Thomas, capable, level-headed in a crisis, and most surprisingly, willing to trust her judgment even in a life-or-death situation. It was a far cry from the man who had returned her to her father because she dared to voice her opinions. People could change, she knew. The question was whether Thomas's transformation was genuine and lasting, or merely a reaction to extraordinary circumstances. The next 3 weeks would tell. The following days established a new rhythm between them. Victoria arrived at the ranch each morning and spent the day working alongside Thomas in all aspects of the operation. True to his word, he included her in everything from inspecting the herds to negotiating with the army buyers who came to replace the contracts lost to the rustlers. To Victoria's surprise, Thomas not only listened to her suggestions but often deferred to her judgment, particularly in financial matters. When they revisited the expansion plans, he readily accepted her proposal to phase the growth over 3 years rather than attempting everything at once. Your way preserves our capital while still allowing for growth, he acknowledged after studying her carefully drawn projections. It's smarter than what I had in mind. Such moments of genuine respect accumulated gradually, building a foundation of trust that had been missing during their brief courtship. They still argued occasionally. Both were too strong-willed for complete harmony, but the arguments had changed in nature. Rather than power struggles, they became honest exchanges of differing perspectives, often resulting in better solutions than either would have reached alone. As the days passed, Victoria found herself looking forward to the ride to the ranch each morning, eager for Thomas's company in a way that both excited and frightened her. She was falling for him again, or perhaps, she admitted to herself, she had never truly stopped loving him despite his rejection. The physical attraction between them remained powerful, simmering beneath the surface of their professional partnership. Thomas was scrupulously respectful, never presuming upon their growing closeness, but Victoria caught the heat in his gaze when he thought she wasn't looking. She knew her own expression probably betrayed similar feelings. 2 weeks into their arrangement, a letter arrived that would test their newfound partnership. Victoria was in the ranch office, reviewing the quarterly accounts, when Thomas entered with an envelope bearing an official seal. "It's from the Cattlemen's Association in Denver," he said, opening the letter and quickly scanning its contents. His expression brightened as he read. "They're offering me us a chance to supply breeding stock for a new government program. Prime rates, guaranteed purchases for the next 5 years." Victoria set aside her ledger. "That sounds like an incredible opportunity." "It is," Thomas agreed, passing her the letter. "But there's a catch. I'd need to travel to Denver next week for the final negotiations. Stay there at least a month while the details are worked out." Victoria read the letter carefully, understanding immediately why this posed a dilemma. Their agreement had only 1 week remaining, and they had yet to discuss what would happen afterward. "You should go," she said, looking up from the paper. "This is exactly the kind of stable contract the ranch needs for long-term success." Thomas studied her face. "Would you come with me?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with implications beyond a simple business trip. Victoria knew he was asking for more than her expertise in negotiations. "To Denver?" she said, playing for time while her thoughts raced. "In what capacity, Thomas?" He set the letter aside, moving to kneel beside her chair so they were at eye level. "In whatever capacity you choose, Victoria. As my business partner, if that's all you're willing to be. As my wife, if you found it in your heart to give me another chance." Victoria's breath caught. "Are you proposing? Again?" "I am," Thomas said, taking her hand gently in his. "But differently this time. I'm not asking for a wife who will stand quietly in my shadow. I'm asking for a partner who will stand beside me, challenge me when I'm wrong, guide me when I'm lost." Tears pricked at Victoria's eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. She blinked them back. "How do I know you won't change your mind again? That the first time I disagree with you in public, you won't decide my tongue is too sharp after all?" Thomas's expression grew solemn. "I can't prove what hasn't happened yet. I can only show you who I am now, who I'm trying to be. These past weeks have been the happiest of my life, Victoria. Working with you, building something together, it's everything I never knew I wanted." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "The day the rustlers took you, when I saw that knife at your throat, I realized something. I wasn't afraid of losing someone who agreed with me or flattered my ego. I was afraid of losing the woman who makes me better, who sees things I miss, who challenges me to be more than I am." Victoria felt her resistance melting under the sincerity in his gaze. Still, caution held her back from immediate acceptance. "I need time to think, Thomas. This isn't a decision I can make lightly." Thomas nodded, squeezing her hand gently before releasing it. "Take all the time you need. The offer stands, regardless of your answer about Denver." That evening, as Victoria rode back to town, her mind was filled with competing thoughts and emotions. Thomas's proposal had been everything she could have hoped for, acknowledging her worth, valuing her mind and spirit, offering true partnership rather than mere matrimony. Yet doubt lingered, a protective instinct born from past hurt. She found her father in his study, reviewing correspondence from suppliers. George Granger looked up as she entered, noting her troubled expression immediately. "What's wrong, Victoria? Has O'Malley upset you again?" Victoria shook her head, sinking into the chair opposite his desk. "Quite the opposite, father. He's asked me to marry him. Again." George set down his papers, giving her his full attention. "And what did you tell him?" "That I needed time to think," Victoria replied. "He also asked me to accompany him to Denver next week for business negotiations that could last a month or more." Her father's bushy eyebrows rose in surprise. "And he's leaving the decision to you? The Thomas O'Malley who returned you for your fierce tongue is now willing to be guided by it." Despite her turmoil, Victoria smiled at her father's phrasing. He says that's precisely why he wants me now for my mind, my willingness to challenge him. George Granger leaned back in his chair, studying his daughter thoughtfully. People can change, Victoria. I've seen it happen. Your mother changed me profoundly, made me less rigid, more willing to see beyond my own narrow view of the world. Victoria looked up in surprise. Her father rarely spoke of her mother, the grief still too raw even after 3 years. She had a fierce tongue too, you know, George continued, a sad smile playing at his lips. First time I met her, she told me my prices were highway robbery and my manner would sour milk. Married her 6 months later, never regretted a day of it. You think I should accept Thomas's proposal? Victoria asked, genuinely curious about her father's opinion. George shook his head. I think you should follow your heart, but with your eyes open. The question isn't whether he's changed, it's whether he's changed enough, and whether that change will last when life isn't exciting or dangerous. Victoria nodded, understanding her father's wisdom. The true test of Thomas's transformation wouldn't come during cattle-rustling adventures or high-stakes business deals, but in the quiet, ordinary moments of shared life. Whatever you decide, her father added, know that you have my support. Your mother raised you to be independent and clear-sighted. Trust those qualities now. Victoria rose, kissing her father's forehead with a rush of affection. Thank you, Father. I think I know what I need to do. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the late summer sky an endless blue vault above the rolling landscape. Victoria dressed with particular care, selecting a cornflower blue dress that Thomas had once admired, arranging her hair in a simple but elegant style. She rode to the ranch with purpose, her decision made after a night of reflection. When she arrived, Thomas was in the corral, working with a young horse. He looked up at her approach, his face lighting with a smile that made her heart skip. Victoria, he called, handing the horse's lead to a nearby ranch hand and crossing to meet her. I wasn't sure you'd come today. I said I would, she replied simply, dismounting without assistance. Thomas studied her face, trying to read her expression. Have you thought about what we discussed yesterday? Victoria nodded, suddenly nervous despite her certainty. I have. Walk with me. They strolled away from the main buildings, toward a small rise that overlooked the ranch. Neither spoke until they reached the top, where the view spread out before them: the house, the barns, the grazing cattle, and beyond them, the vast expanse of grassland rolling to the distant mountains. It's beautiful, Victoria said softly. You've built something remarkable here, Thomas. We could build something even better together, he replied, his voice equally quiet. Victoria turned to face him directly. Before I give you my answer, I need to know something. That day, when you returned me to my father, what exactly did you say to him? Thomas looked surprised by the question, but answered without hesitation. I told him that I wasn't ready for a wife like you, that your fierce tongue and independent mind were more than I knew how to handle. And now, Victoria pressed, now I know that's exactly what I need, Thomas said firmly. A woman who will speak truth even when it's uncomfortable, who sees clearly what I miss in my stubbornness. Victoria nodded, satisfied by his answer. I've made my decision, Thomas. I'll go to Denver with you, as your business partner and your fiancé. But we won't marry until after we return. Thomas's face broke into a radiant smile. You mean it? You'll marry me? On one condition, Victoria added, holding up a hand to temper his excitement. We write our own wedding vows. I won't promise to obey a man who values me for my disobedience. Thomas laughed, the sound joyful and free. I wouldn't have it any other way. Write whatever vows you wish, Victoria. I'll match them with promises I intend to keep for a lifetime. He reached for her then, his hands gentle as they framed her face. May I kiss you, Miss Granger? It's been far too long. In answer, Victoria closed the distance between them, her lips meeting his in a kiss that felt both familiar and entirely new. His arms encircled her, drawing her closer as the kiss deepened, passion quickly replacing tenderness. When they finally parted, breathless and flushed, Thomas rested his forehead against hers. I love you, Victoria. Your mind, your spirit, your fierce tongue, all of you. Victoria smiled up at him, her heart full. And I love you, Thomas O'Malley, even when you're being impossibly stubborn. Especially then, he murmured, kissing her again briefly. That's when I need your love most. They returned to the ranch house hand in hand, plans for Denver and beyond already forming between them. Victoria knew there would be challenges ahead. Two strong-willed people forging a life together could hardly expect smooth sailing always. But she also knew they were stronger together than apart, their differences complementary rather than divisive when approached with respect and love. The journey to Denver the following week marked the beginning of their new life together. The negotiations with the Cattlemen's Association were successful beyond their expectations, with Victoria's shrewd business sense complementing Thomas's practical knowledge of cattle breeding. The contract they secured promised stability and growth for the ranch for years to come. True to her word, Victoria insisted they wait until their return to Silver Creek for the wedding. The ceremony, held on a perfect autumn day with the aspen trees gilded in gold, was attended by the entire town, many of whom had witnessed their tumultuous beginning. As they stood before the minister, Thomas looked at Victoria with undisguised adoration. When the time came for their vows, he spoke first, his voice carrying clearly to all assembled. Victoria, I take you as my wife not despite your fierce spirit but because of it. I promise to listen when you speak, to value your wisdom, to stand beside you as an equal in all things. I promise to love not just the parts of you that are easy to love, but those that challenge me to be a better man. Victoria's eyes shimmered with unshed tears as she responded. Thomas, I take you as my husband with clear eyes and a full heart. I promise to speak truth to you always, to share both my strength and my vulnerability, to build with you a partnership founded on mutual respect. I promise to love you through stubbornness and change, through triumph and struggle, all the days of our lives. As they sealed their vows with a kiss, cheers erupted from the gathered townspeople. Even Victoria's father was smiling broadly, his earlier reservations replaced by genuine happiness for his daughter. The years that followed proved the wisdom of their unconventional courtship. The O'Malley Ranch flourished under their joint management, expanding thoughtfully according to Victoria's careful plans, while maintaining the quality that had been Thomas's hallmark. They added a horse breeding program that became renowned throughout the territory, combining Thomas's eye for good stock with Victoria's business acumen. 2 years after their wedding, Victoria gave birth to a daughter they named Eleanor, after Victoria's mother. The child inherited her mother's honey blonde hair and her father's determined chin, along with both their strong wills, much to the amusement of everyone in Silver Creek. Lord help us, Thomas would say with a laugh when 3-year-old Eleanor stubbornly argued for staying up past her bedtime. She's got a fiercer tongue than her mother, and you wouldn't have it any other way, Victoria would remind him, sharing a smile that spoke of their journey from misunderstanding to true partnership. On their 5th wedding anniversary, as they sat on the porch of their expanded ranch house watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple, Thomas took Victoria's hand in his. Do you ever think about that day I returned you to your father? He asked quietly. Victoria leaned her head against his shoulder. Sometimes. It was the worst day of my life at the time. And now, she smiled, watching Eleanor playing with her wooden horses in the yard. Their second child, a son named James, sleeping peacefully in the cradle beside them. Now I see it was necessary. We weren't ready for each other then. You weren't ready for a wife with a fierce tongue, and I wasn't ready for a husband who couldn't value it. Thomas pressed a kiss to her temple. Best mistake I ever made, returning you. It taught me what I truly needed. And what's that? Victoria asked, though she knew the answer. Thomas turned to her, his eyes filled with the love that had only deepened with the passing years. A partner who speaks her mind, who challenges me when I need challenging, who makes me better than I could ever be alone. Victoria leaned in to kiss him properly, a kiss full of history and promise. That fierce tongue of mine, she murmured against his lips. Still the reason you want me? Thomas smiled, drawing her closer. Always, Victoria. Always the best reason of all. As the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in spectacular colors, the O'Malleys sat contentedly together, their children nearby, their hearts full. The journey that had begun with rejection had led them to a deeper understanding, a truer partnership than either could have imagined. In the end, Victoria's fierce tongue and Thomas's willingness to listen to it had built not just a successful ranch, but a love story that would be told in Silver Creek for generations to come.